You are listening to the IFH Podcast Network. For more amazing filmmaking and screenwriting podcasts, just go to ifhpodcastnetwork.com.
Welcome to the Bulletproof Screenwriting Podcast, episode number 136. No one escapes from life alive. Michael Crichton.
Broadcasting from a dark, windowless room in Hollywood when we really should be working on that next draft.
It's the Bulletproof Screenwriting Podcast,
Showing you the craft and business of screenwriting while teaching you how to make your screenplay bulletproof. And here's your host, Alex Ferrari.
Welcome to another episode of the Bulletproof Screenwriting Podcast. I am your humble host, Alex Ferrari. Now, today's show is sponsored by Bulletproof Script Coverage. Now, unlike other script coverage services, Bulletproof Script Coverage actually focuses on the kind of project you are and the goals of the project you are. So we actually break it down by three categories: micro budget, indie film market, and studio film. There's no reason to get coverage from a reader that's used to reading tentpole movies when your movie's going to be done for $100,000. And we wanted to focus on that at Bulletproof Script Coverage. Our readers have worked with Marvel Studios, CAA, WME, NBC, HBO, Disney, Scott Free, Warner Brothers, The Blacklist, and many, many more. So if you need your screenplay or TV script covered by professional readers, head on over to covermyscreenplay.com. And today's show is also sponsored by the Heart Chart Screenwriting Masterclass taught by legendary screenwriter James V. Hart, the writer of Bram Stoker's Dracula, Hook, and Contact, to name a few. His unique story mapping system will teach you how to get your script ready for production and the marketplace. To gain instant access, head over to bulletproofscreenwriting.tv/heart chart. That's HART chart. Now, guys, today we are going to go down a scary rabbit hole. We are going to be talking about the nature of fear in horror screenwriting with author and writer Devin Watson. And we get into some creepy areas here. We really start getting into the psychological reasons why we're afraid, how we can use those in our stories, how we can scare the living crap out of people with our stories. So without any further ado, please enjoy my terrifying conversation with Devin Watson. I'd like to welcome to the show Devin Watson, man. How you doing, Devin?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing great, man. Thank you so much for jumping on the show, man. I truly appreciate it. I'm looking forward to diving into the deep end of horror screenwriting with you today. Now, before we get started, how did you get started in the film industry and the love of what you do?
Well, it was a while ago. Well, I would say probably the late 90s. Mm-hmm. I worked on a website called moviepartners.com, and that's kind of gone the way of the dodo now, but that was basically one of the first websites out there that really had any kind of information on independent filmmaking around at the time. There was even somebody who wrote their graduation thesis on it as like what was going to happen, and they were presaging like YouTube and Vimeo and things like that long before it actually came around. But
wow,
that was where I really got my start, was on the technology side of things. And eventually I'm like, I should really start writing some stuff too. So I ended up reading a few books. I mean, that's kind of the way I am, is like, if I want to learn something, I'm going to go get some books. Mm-hmm. So I started out with really the one book that helped me the most at that time was Screenwriting 434 by Lou Hunter, because there wasn't a whole lot out there at that point in time. So
not in the 90s, definitely.
Yeah. So that's where I basically got my start in that, and then I wrote 4 or 5 scripts, and yeah, they sucked. I'm not gonna lie. I try to tell people that your first couple of scripts are just going to be bad, but that's okay, because as long as you get a little bit better with each one, it's not going to be a total loss, and you can always go back later and revise them if you want. If you want to see if you can polish them up and make them into what you had originally thought they should be, you can do that. And then I moved to Tennessee, and I was living with my producing partner at the time, Phil Melfi. And that's when like basically right after Thanksgiving, 2006, I wrote. Basically, he said, "If you write a script, I will read it, and I won't just toss it in the trash can." I was like, "Okay." So on that bet, I just sat down over the weekend and just churned out like a real serious one that I wanted to do, because I had all these ideas floating around in my head, and finally they just all coalesced. And I said, "Okay, now I got to write this thing." So I got it out as fast as I could, because I had another gig on Monday, and I was like, well, I only got the weekend. I got to do this. So I finished it late Sunday night. Phil was already asleep, but I emailed it to him, and then I went into his room and I said, "Okay, I finished it." So he popped right up out of bed and he just read the thing, and came outside, and his mouth was open because he knew I'd started it. He didn't realize I was going to finish it then. And I said, "Well, was it really that bad?" So he was like, No, it's actually really good. And a couple of months later, we actually managed to get financing for it, and that became The Cursed, which is still out. Sci-Fi Channel picked it up, and they like to put that in their regular Halloween rotation in October, but it's also available on Amazon. So it's amazing just to see something like that get up there, and it's like, wow, it's up there.
And you wrote it in 2 days.
Pretty much, yeah.
So like most screenplays are written. Most screenplays are written in 2 days. You really don't need to take more than 2 days to write a screenplay, right?
Not really. No. Well, I didn't find out till after that you're like it's supposed to take 3 months. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, I mean, I did revise it. I did like 2 or 3 more drafts. But that was over the next week. I would just say like, well, I don't really like how this part went, so I want to. Sure. But that's mostly just tune-up. Once you get to a point. So.
Well, so I mean, your book about horror screenwriting really dives into the craft of horror screenwriting specifically pretty deeply. What were some of the first horror films ever made, and what can we learn from them today?
Well, believe it or not, one of the first actual films ever made was a horror film. So that's I think it's called The Dark Castle in 1896. So horror's been around as long as filmmaking has been around.
And what was that movie about?
Well,
it was a short, obviously. It was a short.
Well, yeah. It's really just about it's a haunted house, dark, spooky castle. That's really what it's about. So, yeah. I mean, even back then, people were they were afraid of the dark, scary places, and they were like, "Hey, we can play on that because that's what people are afraid of, and they want to get scared, but they can get scared safely by just watching a film." And I think that was it the Lumieres? I think it was the Lumiere brothers that
who did that one.
Yeah. So
when Nosferatu showed up, when that was
the first iteration was, I want to say in the early 20s.
So still like, yeah, that's 20 years later. So it was, and Frankenstein. And I'm assuming was there a Frankenstein adaptation in Silent Times?
Yep, there's actually one from, I believe, 1916 that is Edison Studios. That was one of the first ones. And that's actually in public domain now, and you can watch it on archive.org. It's up there, and The Dark Castle is up there. Well, it's as much of it as could be found and restored is available up there as well. And people have actually taken Nosferatu, and since it's in public domain, they've done all kinds of things to it. Like they've added their own film score. So like you want to hear it with like the classical organ pieces. You want to hear it with an orchestra, or you want to hear it with like goth metal. Somebody did a goth metal version of it. That's up there too. So that's what I love about it.
So, and I'm assuming they were hits back then. I mean, well, first of all, movies were a hit just because it was a movie. But horror really started to get... Was there a specific movie back then that really caused a stir? That really kind of like scared the living... Because for us, it was like The Exorcist. Like The Exorcist is the first one of our generation that I can think of that was the movie that literally just scared the bejesus out of everybody. Like it just terrified. I mean, Psycho to a certain extent too, but Exorcist was at a whole other level.
Oh yeah. That was like the pure shock value of it. It's like, wow. And bad enough that Billy Graham says the devil is in the celluloid. I've seen it. It's like, hey.
God, Jesus,
so,
literally Jesus.
I think Nosferatu was definitely one of the first big ones, because it plays into German expressionism,
right?
Which was one of the big founding factors art wise, because just like now. A lot of films don't have enough budget. So what do? You work with what you got, and German expressionism is really good for that, because it doesn't rely on a lot of big fancy sets or anything like that. Mm-hmm. You fill in the gaps with your imagination.
Now, throughout history, society has really kind of shaped and cultured, and the culture has shaped how horror films are presented depending on what country you're from, what time period you're from. Obviously, like The Exorcist played up on, in America specifically, the Christianity, I can't even say the word, Jewish Christian kind of taboos, and really touched on that culturally. Throughout history though, how has society and culture really affected the horror genre?
Well, even going way, way back, you have like the ancient Sumerians, who they created gods specifically to scare children into being obedient. Like, if you go out after dark, this god is going to come and grab you and eat you. So scaring somebody, when somebody's scared, they'll do things they don't normally do. It's a one way to just, like you see in the slasher flicks, like Friday the 13th and everything, where you see the teenage girl screaming and running away through the woods. It's like, no, don't go that way. It was like, well, she's scared out of her mind. She's going to do the exact opposite of what she should do.
Right. Like, why are you going into that room alone? Like, why? Yeah. Seriously. What's the point of that? Yeah. And then obviously the Sumerian gods were then showed up in Ghostbusters, where they took care of them. Obviously.
Yep. And I honestly, I mean, if you didn't make the bad guys truly bad, Gozer wouldn't have been the thing that really would have. I mean, yeah, it's a comedy, but it's a horror comedy, so it's a
weird. Yeah, Ghostbusters was a weird, because there've been horror comedies. I assumed there were horror comedies prior to that. Mm-hmm. But Ghostbusters just took it to and obviously Ghostbusters is a lot more comedy than horror. But there's some scary moments in that, like in the bottom of the library. That terrified me as a kid. I was like, Jesus. I mean, Slimer wasn't as scary, but still, it could definitely be scary. I'm actually kind of excited about the new one, the one that's a direct sequel to the Ghostbusters with Jason Reitman's. It looks like he's paying really nice homage to. It actually made me really miss Harold Ramis a lot after I was watching that trailer. I was like tearing up. I'm like, wait, Harold, you gone?
Believe me, I got a tear in my eye too, and I was like, oh, I so want to see this. It's like, I will go to the theater and I will see this, and I will gladly watch it, because it just looks so amazing what they did. And I think Paul Rudd is somebody that could definitely pick up the mantle, so to speak. Mm-hmm. At least from the comedy side of things. At least looking at the extended trailers and seeing him with the Stay Puft Marshmallow Men.
Oh, that was so great. That was so great. I'm really looking forward to it. And again, for younger viewers listening, they'll be like, it looks like another movie. But for guys like you and me who grew up with Ghostbusters and saw it in the theater, we're just like, Jason knew exactly what he was doing when he wrote the script. Like he is touching nerves that needed to be touched. I think that was probably one of the reasons why the all-female Ghostbusters movie got such backlash, is because it was so disrespectful to the original lore of it, and many people thought of it that way. I thought it was fine, but it was just not a sequel. It was just
right. It was something else.
It was something other thing that was, that lived on its own fine. It was a fine. But I think it was weird. Okay, we are going off the deep end in the Ghostbusters world, so I apologize, everybody. It's just it's what happens when film geeks get together. But anyway, now there's so many different kinds of horror. What are the different kind of horror movies? Because a lot of people just think horror is horror, but there's many subgenres within horror.
Oh yeah. You've got like the kind of a surface layer of just the popcorn movies, as I call it, like where you just disengage brain and you just watch it and try not to analyze it because you won't get anything out of it. You won't enjoy it. Like watching Halloween or the Friday the 13th series or Nightmare on Elm Street. The other ones you've got the supernatural type horror films like basically most of your Vincent Price movies from the 50s and 60s. And the Hammer horror films where you got the something closer to what would be considered body horror now, like Frankenstein. And you have Dracula, another supernatural being. That was another area right there. And then you have like you get into stuff like a David Cronenberg, like The Fly and stuff like that. Well, basically all of his early films dealt with your body changing into something horrible and you can't do anything about it. And that's
the horror within almost.
Right. It's like there's something existential about it as well. If you really want to dive deep into that, there's that. And then you've got, like zombie films where the monsters are you think that's the zombies, but then you find like, oh, well, there's still people who are alive.
It's generally the humans who are the monsters. If Night of the Living Dead taught us anything, it was that the people were the monsters, not the zombies. But then there's obviously like, vampire films, ghost films, torture porn, like the Jigsaw and Saw movies and Hostel films, and those kind of things. So there's a lot of, and then of course there's the monster movie to a certain extent, but like the killer monster movie, like,
Alien.
Well, there's literally the monster movie, but then you've got the Halloween, the serial killer, but like then there's the supernatural aspects of those things. So like there's a lot, like Freddy is a combination of a bunch of different. And Freddy just the first Nightmare on Elm Street was fairly terrifying, especially for its time. But then he became it literally was a comedy routine after the second one. It was like Freddy's hilarious. Yeah, that's I call him he's the cruel jester at that point, because he's like, yes, I'm going to kill you, but I'm going to have fun doing it, and I'm going to crack jokes while I'm doing it. Right. Yeah. Whereas in Michael Myers and Jason never change; they're always the same, just unstoppable force that comes in. And I still consider one of the greatest horror movies of all time is Jaws. It still holds to this day. You can watch it, and we know it's a mechanical shark. And when the shark does come out, it's not horrible, but it's definitely not, completely 100% believable. But yet, it's Spielberg. It's just, it's absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, and I think that from a visual perspective, I mean, part of what scares the bejesus out of you with Jaws is that you just see the fin for most of the movie. It's not until you're like way deep into the movie
before you see it.
Yeah, when Roy Scheider's chumming the water and he's not even looking, and that thing just comes out of the water, and you're like, oh, wow, okay, now we got it. Now we see this thing's like 20 feet long, and it's a monstrosity.
Yeah, and I mean, and Spielberg single-handedly has destroyed a species because people are still terrified by sharks and want to kill them and all this kind of stuff because of that movie, and it's funny, but it's horrible at the same time. But he was able to do that. And you watch something like Poltergeist, which is Tobe Hooper. And I was talking to a filmmaker the other day about this, and I'm like, I'm a fan of Tobe, but Tobe really never got as good as Poltergeist ever again. And from what I heard from behind the scenes is that Steven had a hand in this. That's why Poltergeist it's a masterwork.
Yeah. And from what I understand, Spielberg was under contract that he couldn't direct two movies at the same time. So So he was like, okay, I'm going to go do E.T., but here's all my notes that I had already done for Poltergeist. So, yeah, Toby had help, I would think, a little bit from that, but still, he was the one actually doing it.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show.
And I think the scene where the guy is ripping his face off in front of the mirror, the hands were actually Steven Spielberg's.
Yeah, it's interesting that Steven has not gone back to horror. Even though he kind of started his career as a scare mind, even in Close Encounters. Close Encounters has a lot of scary moments in it. Even E.T. has some scary moments in it. He has that wonderful ability, but he never went back to it. If I ever have him on the show, I'll ask him, when are you going to do another horror movie, Steven?
Well, the nice thing is you do not have to have a huge budget to make a horror film, which is why it's so easily accessible to independent filmmakers. Like, look at the Blair Witch Project. I mean, that was made for like pocket change, and probably the most, I mean, I guess adjusted for inflation, it probably still is one of the most successful indie films ever made.
It was a very successful indie film, and I actually had Eduardo, one of the directors, on the show a while ago, and I told him, I'm like, man, I love the movie, and this is a spoiler alert if anyone's listening, skip 15 seconds ahead, 30 seconds ahead, but the only thing that would have made that film perfect for me is at the end when the camera falls, you would just see a pair of floating feet just go by.
Oh yeah,
that would have. I just got chills thinking about that. Could you imagine if you would have just seen some floating feet just go by?
Yeah, that's very reminiscent of the previous generation of found footage movies, like basically what I call the second Italian Renaissance in the 70s, where you have like the Green Inferno, Lucio Fulci, those guys, just Mario Bava, just cranking them out left and right. Italian actors dubbed into English. And a lot of those they would end on a shot of like the camera hits the ground, but then you see one of the principal characters that's still left. They hit the ground and their head is just like split open and bloody. And it's like, yep, okay, it's over.
And scene. Now, us as a species are, I think on an evolutionary standpoint, we're very fearful because we're afraid about what is going to kill us. That's just instinctual. Like what's around the corner is that I always use is a tiger down by the lake? Is the tiger going to get me around the corner? So you're always looking for that kind of fear thing. Where, in your opinion, does fear come from in our species as a general statement?
Believe it or not, I believe that it is a survival trait. It's what kept us alive as a species. Although now we can actually use that, we can leverage that as screenwriters to really play on it. And it's like, oh, you're afraid of this. Okay, we're gonna really, people are afraid of clowns because of it, but people were already afraid of clowns even before it came around.
But I mean, to be fair, clowns are an abomination and need to be stopped.
Oh yeah. Trust me, seeing that clown in Poltergeist when it popped up from behind him.
Okay, all right. So let's before we start, let's just go right here. The scariest moment of my youth was sleeping over at a friend's house who had HBO, because we didn't have HBO because that's only for rich people. And I walked in and they're like, what are you watching? I'm like, oh, we're watching this film called Poltergeist. And I sat there for 3 minutes and it was a scene where the little kid got taken down by the clown, the life-size, whatever, the kid-size clown, and took him under the bed. That still to this day terrifies me. Not that clowns, I mean, I don't like lose my mind if I see a clown. I'm like, dude, you're a grown-ass man. Stop it. I'm sorry for all the clowns out there. I just can't. No. But I went home that night, or the night, and the next day I went home and I had a Sylvester, like for Sylvester and Tweety, which was about the same size as that clown. So then I put him in the corner and I aimed all my G.I. Joes and Transformers with guns aimed at him in a half circle so I could go to sleep. And then my mom walked in. She's like, Alex, what does Sylvester do to you? I'm like, Mom, you don't want to know. He's just shady.
It's not what he's done. It's what he's going to do.
What he has the potential of doing for me. And this is prior to Chucky or anything like that. I can only imagine if I would have seen something like Chucky when I was that age. But continue, sir. I'm sorry. You were where fear comes from.
Yeah, where fear comes from. Yeah, it's a base survival instinct. If something scares you, you have the fight or flight response. Most of the time, it's flight. It's like, get me out of here. I want to get away from this. And then what guys like Stephen King can do is they tap into a very universal fear of something. Like for him, he's like the fear of clowns. That's one thing. He has a fear of mice or rats. So you got something like Graveyard Shift. You get stories like that. And that's where I try to teach people in the book. It's like, start with what scares you and try to understand why it scares you. And it all just comes from, a lot of it just stems from the unknown. It's like, I don't know what that is, but it seems really scary, so I'm going to stay away from it. Mm. So if you can tap that, especially with yourself, you got to be kind of honest with yourself, like what really scares you. And that's even just straight up jump scares, which I think are kind of a cheap thing to do. I don't mind if a movie does it like once or twice.
Yeah, sure. It's fun. It's fun. It's a roller coaster ride. It's a drop. It's a drop.
Right. But if you're relying on that constantly throughout your film, I mean, it's going to lose its efficacy. It's not going to, the 10th time around is not as good as like the first time around. It's kind of like saying the same joke over and over again. It just stops getting funny, you know?
Right. Or the villain never dies and just keeps coming back and keeps going. That's what I love about Scream, that just literally just poked fun at all the tropes while doing them. It was absolutely brilliant work. And I think that's one of the things, I think you're talking about tapping into universal fears. M. Night Shyamalan's new movie, Old. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's terrifying.
Yep.
I mean, it's like you walk in and you're like, oh my God, I'm growing older as we speak rapidly. That is a terrifying. Has that ever been on cinema before? I don't think it has.
No, I don't really. Well, there's
elements of it, but not like that.
Right. Not at that rate or speed or anything like that.
Famous book, A Portrait of Dorian Gray. Right. It has a similar fear of aging.
Right. Which that goes back way back. So.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you can tap that, there's this existential dread of like, this is inevitable. It's happening to you and you cannot get away from it. That can terrify so many people just by saying, yeah, there's nothing you can do about it.
But like The Fly, like you were saying with Cronenberg, like The Fly, it is something that's like, you are turning into a monster.
Right.
And you have no, it's like, and again, tapping into Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde again at that point, to a certain extent.
Yeah. And when the time period, okay, so Cronenberg has vehemently denied any connection with it being an allegory for AIDS, but it was very much in the forefront of people's minds that like, okay, because that was mid 80s. And
that's exactly when it exploded. Yeah.
Yeah. So people were like automatically connecting that in their minds to say, yeah, this could very well be a story about somebody with AIDS or an allegory about it. And he's like, no, it's not really about that. But yeah, you could easily make the connections yourself in your mind. And that's one thing that good horror could do is your audience can find connections that you never thought of with things like Night of the Living Dead. A lot of people make the original Night of the Living Dead, make the connection that it was about mindless consumerism. Just people like we're becoming zombies. You know, they can find some greater social message inside of a horror film that on its surface, yeah, it's about zombies and people holed up in a house and fighting with each other. But
I think George Romero made that even more clear. Is it Dawn of the Dead or when it was in the mall?
Yeah.
I mean, he literally was not hiding it at that point.
Yeah. He's like, okay, I'm going to run with this now. It's like, you say it is? Okay.
Exactly.
And then you've got, just one scene to me that always sums up existential dread is this. There's a scene in the original Alien when Lambert is cornered and Parker's just been killed. And it's just very slowly showing this thing creeping towards her, this look on her face of like, oh my God, this thing's going to kill me. And you see its tail just go between her legs and up her back. And it's just very, very slowly shot. And then right at the end of it, you hear her scream. And then the next thing you know, all you can hear is her just breathing really rapidly over the speaker system in the ship. And then you hear the alien just make a noise, and she screams one last time, and that's it. And all you're hearing at that point is just Ripley running down the hallway, and that's it. It's like, okay, we know she's dead now, but that was like her biggest fear, was that thing killing her, because she was freaking out long before that happened. It's like, yeah, it's almost like she was the chorus. She was speaking for the audience. Like, oh yeah, we're not that thing, yeah.
Yeah, and Alien itself is a masterwork in horror and genre smashing with the sci-fi. I think I'm not sure if it was the first sci-fi horror, but it definitely is the granddaddy of it.
Yeah, definitely. I think without that, because it was the haunted house in space idea, where you've got this thing lurking around. It really put a lot of concrete rules, not really solely concrete, but you've got these rules of like, you don't have to show the entire creature because your audience's imagination is going to fill it in for you. And it's like, okay, we don't need such a huge budget to show this thing. And like, this thing looks terrifying. I think without Alien, we probably would not have had Event Horizon, because they're both the haunted house in space kind of ideas. But instead of an alien monster running around, the ship itself is haunted and went to hell or something approximating it.
Right. And then the sequel, which was just Alien on steroids, which is Aliens, James Cameron's masterpiece, is another genre, clashing with is action horror, which you don't see as much action horror anymore. I mean, you did a little bit now with Zack Snyder's new zombie film that came out.
Yeah, I think it's harder. It's not just harder to put together, but with action, you've got stunts, explosions, pyro. You've got the whole 9 yards, and it just ratchets up the difficulty level of shooting with also budgets. And yeah, again, it's like, wow, that was incredible. I didn't think they could actually do a really good sequel. And it's like, okay, well, we're just going to go in this other direction. And then Alien 3 came around, and Fincher took it kind of back to the original roots, which was
haunted house. Nice. It was a haunted house. I would have loved to actually see his version, not the studio's version. I would love to see a real David Fincher director's cut, which I don't think he'll ever do, because he hated that process. So it almost drew him out. He almost left the business. But
thankfully, he went on and gave us 7. So.
And Fight Club, and so on, and so on, and so on, and so on. Now, in your book, you talk about the talking head problem. What is the talking head problem?
Okay, the talking head problem is where you're just running dialogue and just like constantly just talking back and forth. It's really easy to fall into that trap where you just have the characters talk about things to tell the audience what's going on. And you don't have to. I mean, a screenplay is showing, not telling. It's a screenplay. So that's where a lot of, especially first-time writers, they fall down, is they just go very dialogue heavy. And in a horror film, it's more about just, here's 2, let the audience add it up to 4. And that really can help. I mean, look at how much dialogue is in the original Nightmare on Elm Street. Not a lot. Freddy doesn't even talk, really. I mean,
he's just he didn't get his personality till the second one, really.
Right. Yeah. And the same thing with Halloween. Michael Myers never talked at all, and that's makes him all the scarier. And same thing with Jason, never talked at all, really, unless you count the very end of Manhattan. But
we try not to think about Manhattan.
Yeah. That was one of those ones that's like, that ending. I can't figure it out.
I remember when it came out, I was like, really? You guys are just running out of stuff.
Yeah, like, what just happened here?
Yes.
But yeah, if you can keep the people talking, there's definitely some need for it in certain parts, and usually it's right in the front. Like Event Horizon had that scene where they're on the ship and they're setting things up after they get out of stasis, and they're just talking about like, okay, what's happening, why are we here, that kind of thing, and they're just trying to fill in the blanks as quickly as possible, but just enough of the blanks where the audience can start to piece things together more easily later.
Right, in a movie like The Thing, which is another one of those that there's just a bunch of people locked in a place, and I don't remember there being a talking head issue there, but there definitely is some talking heads in there.
Yeah, and it's spread out, and it's very, they're not like going on for page after page after page. They're just like, okay, we got to do this right now, and most of the dialogue is them arguing back and forth about like, well, okay, who let all the blood out of the storage, and like where's the keys and all this kind of stuff. It's more like them trying to figure out the mystery all amongst themselves, but the paranoia levels are just going up and up and up while they're doing it.
One thing that I love, one little tip I've gotten from James Cameron films, and he's the one that said it very clearly in Terminator, is when you have backstory that you need to tell the audience, instead of two people sitting down at a table telling you like, well, I'm from the future, and there's a killer robot after you, it's a cyborg. Instead of that, do it within action. Yep. Which is a great way to do it.
Yep. Kyle Reese did that while they were being chased by the Terminator. He was like, yes, come with me if you want to live, and get in the car, and they're running away from that thing. So,
right.
But the nice thing is, and by the time Terminator 2 comes around, and you got the T-1000 chasing them, there's no talking at that point, because we know what's going on now. We got it.
Right, but that's the thing. So many people you just hear just dialogue that's just sitting there, just like, oh God, you need this backstory. It doesn't work, but it has to be done in an entertaining fashion. So while you're running away from a monster or something like that, if you can tell, if there is absolute necessity for you to tell the backstory of something, if you could do it within action, God, it's just more entertaining.
Yeah, always good. Yeah, if you're gonna have to explain something, at least give them something to do, so it doesn't look so boring. And it's like, oh yeah, they're doing something important that's going to help advance the plot somewhere, but at the same information, but a so direct way. So that really helps. That really helps keep your audience from falling asleep, for one thing.
And the other thing I can't stand when I'm watching not only horror movies, but horror movies in general, screenwriting, is when they're so on the nose with stuff. Like I know, like if you and me are in a scene and you and me are brothers, and we really need to talk about that we're brothers, or that the story is reliant that the audience knows that you and I are related. You don't go, "Hi, brother, how are you?" from the same mother. Like you don't that, but I've seen that. As opposed to doing something in the dialogue that's like, oh, because you're always mom's favorite. That one line says, okay, that's established that we're brothers now, as opposed to saying, hello, brother.
Yeah, well, good line about that. It's the beginning of The Abyss. Ed Harris gets off. He gets off the video call with his wife, but at that point we don't know that, and he's like, God, I hate that bitch. And then the other guy says, probably shouldn't have married her then. So
such a brilliant line. And Cameron is, and I've said this on the show many times, Cameron is one of the most underrated screenwriters, I think one of the most underrated screenwriters in history, because he's such a he's known as a director, and obviously one of the most successful, actually the most successful, depending on the gross numbers, one of the most successful directors of all time. But his writing is read the script for Aliens. I mean, it's a masterwork. It's an absolute masterwork.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I try to point people towards things and say, like, you can't, well, obviously that's a big thing in screenwriting, is watch movies that watch movies if they're good or bad. Watch them, because you can't learn. You're not going to learn as much from the good as you can from the bad. It's like, well, that's what you don't do. But also read the screenplays that went behind it, so then you could see, especially if you can get a copy of the production drafts that actually was used. So then you can see what they cut out, and you can try to figure out why they did that, why it was cut out for like time or anything like that. So then you can fine tune your process when you write, saying.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show.
Okay, this might not work, but I'll leave it in and try to keep it lean and mean if you can.
Yeah, and I think it's a lot harder to learn from really good scripts than it is to learn from really bad scripts, because when you read Tarantino or Cameron or, or some of these master screenwriters, they make it look so easy that it's usually like, well, it's kind of like looking at a painting by Da Vinci. Like it's not that easy. But yet when you watch a bad movie and you're like, oh, that character shouldn't have said that, or the plot's horrible, you learn a lot. It's a lot easier to fix bad than it is to emulate perfection.
Yeah, like Plan 9 from Outer Space, or Manos, The Hands of Fate, or anything like that.
The Room.
Yeah, that one I'm still scratching my head about. It's like, okay, it got made. I don't know, really.
The Room is arguably one of the greatest films of all time, and you can only watch it with other people. If you don't watch it with other people, it's sad. But especially if you can watch it with other filmmakers, which is what last time I saw it was at Sundance with my crew while we were shooting a movie, and none of them had seen it before, and we're all just yelling at the screen, why are you using the same stock footage shot twice? Is he humping her belly button? Why is there a football scene? What is going on? It's so great.
and Tommy Wiseau's never going to say. He's like, well, I guess it's one of those, well, you just don't understand it kind of things.
No, he's like, no, this is all part of my plan. I wanted to make a spoof. No, you didn't. You wanted to make the greatest movie of all time. And the reason why it's the greatest movie now is because you actually intended it to be that. If you intended it to be a spoof, it would have died on the vine.
Yeah. I can see that. I mean, I can take away a lesson from Kubrick as well. You don't have to serve all the answers on a silver platter to your audience. Kubrick, when 2000, The Shining, 2001 premiered. It was at the Cinerama Dome, I think. There were a lot of A-list stars from the time watching it, and they came out. One of them, was it Rock Hudson? He said, like, what the hell did I just watch? And people were always calling or writing to him, asking questions about what did this mean and what did that mean? And he actually loved those kinds of things, because he said, like, if you're walking away from a film and you're asking questions and you're starting a dialogue about it, then I've done my job.
I mean, it's Shining is a perfect example of that. I mean, if you want to talk about horror movies, arguably one of the greatest horror movies of all time, even though it is very far removed from King's original work. But as a piece of art, as a piece of cinema, what he did is a masterwork. And I always found that movie to probably be one of the scariest, not particularly because there's a lot of jump scares, and there's maybe a couple, but it is that it's terrifying on a psychological level. And I found out, because I'm a Kubrick hound, that he actually went to ad agencies and learned about subliminal advertising. So he would sneak. There's stuff inside of The Shining that's built just to screw with us psychologically.
Oh yeah. Psychological devices.
No, the stuff that he did in The Shining were just like it's terrifying, and you can't point at it. Like in Freddy, you're like, oh, Freddy scares the hell out of me, or Jaws are like, oh, that scares the hell out of me, or The Haunted House. But in Shining, you're just like, it's about a dude losing his mind and is about to kill his family, which is also a terrifying idea, that your father could lose his mind and kill you. Like, that's also a very, very primal fear. That
somebody close to you that you love and that loves you is suddenly just going to snap and try to kill you.
Right. Let alone your father or your mother. Right. But I think specifically the father figure throughout humanity. I think, isn't there some sort of thing that the baby, when it's born, within like the first few weeks, looks more like the dad, evolutionary, so the dad doesn't kill it, thinking that it's somebody else's baby or something along those lines.
Yeah,
it's something really deep seated. But then add in all the craziness, and then I'm assuming you saw Room. Was it Room 2?
1237.
Yeah, 237. Oh my God, what a great movie! Like, you just sit there going, well, that makes sense. Like, why did he do that?
Yep.
Why does that window go nowhere? What are you doing, Stanley?
Yep. Well, that's the funny thing about Kubrick that I loved, is that he was just a stickler for detail with everything. And it's like, if it's in there for a reason that he had in his mind. So if you find it, he wanted it there.
Yeah, you're not going to make mistakes. He doesn't make those kind of like, oh, that just kind of fell into it. Like, no, he spends 3 years, 4 years, 5, 6 years, 7 years prepping a film. So it was insane. One thing that horror movies have a lot of is disposable characters.
Yep.
Can you explain why there's so many disposable characters in horror movies?
Okay, so to me, the disposable character is one who, if you can get him to convey some important piece of information, that's great. But usually you want something like the victim, like you need somebody to be the victim of something. I'm trying to remember that one.
Well, in Jaws, the very first victim at the beginning of the movie, the girl.
Yep.
We don't know who she is. All we know is she's a pretty girl swimming in the ocean at night, which obviously is not a good idea.
Right. And then you see her just get yanked a little bit, and then she's trying to stay above the water, and then boom, she's gone. She's there to convey the information to the audience, like there's something in the water, it's big, and it's hungry, and it ate her very very quickly. The beginning of the movie Prophecy, that's what I was thinking of.
With Christopher Walken, yeah.
No, actually the one from the 70s. It's the environmental, it has Armand Assante in it, actually.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the very beginning, you have these guys that are hunting out in the woods with some dogs, and the dogs kind of go over a cliff with they're on ropes or something, and then you hear the dogs just like start freaking out, and then you don't hear anything, and they start climbing down, and you see it from one of they've got like Spelunker helmets on, so they're going down into this like crevasse, I guess, and you see really from one guy's perspective after he's been yanked down in there and he's on the ground, he's already bloody, but you hear something coming at him and he's just screaming his head off as he's about to get torn apart by this mythical beast thing.
That's insane. Now, what are some of the common pitfalls in horror screenwriting?
The one things I've seen a lot of is it's actually not just horror, but it expands to everything. Writing too much description in scene action, where it's like, okay, look at what it is. It's called scene action. Things are happening. Make it happen. Don't describe the books on the bookshelf or anything like that. It's like they don't care about that unless it's really important that your character has red hair and it's going to become important later. Don't even bother divulging that information. You don't have to.
Right. And that is absolutely true. And that's why I always call screenwriting the haiku of writing, narrative writing, because it's you got to say a lot more with less. And that's the art of it, as opposed to a novel where you can do a page of the book and the leather bound and glistened off the.
Yeah. I try to tell people the first 5 pages in a horror script are the most important. You got to get to the point really fast, which you don't have to get the entire point. Just say like, there's something dangerous in the woods. It's killing people. Okay. Explain in 5 pages, show in 5 pages what makes it so dangerous to go in the woods. Or don't go in that house. You know, somebody got murdered in there like 30 years ago and it's haunted. You got that first. If you can even do it in less, that's even better.
Well, Jaws is a perfect example.
Yeah. And if you can keep it under 5, great. And then once you've got that, then you got a good framework to build on, because then you can say like, all right, how much do we show or not show? Well, the nice thing about horror is it's about not showing as much as it is about showing. So,
yeah. I mean, Hitchcock I'm sure Hitchcock's not the first to do this, but he always said that you want to hear the murder behind the door. You don't want to actually see it because it's going to be a lot more terrifying that way. And it's very, very true. I mean, the masterwork of the Psycho's shower scene, which is you don't ever see the knife go in her ever.
Right.
And, but we do in our mind.
Yep. Yeah. And then you see the blood trickle down the drain.
It's just a masterwork. So
yep.
good.
Yeah. And,
I mean, there's a documentary just dedicated to the shower scene.
Yeah. I've seen it.
It's so good. It's so good.
Just the deep analysis of it. It's like, wow. Okay. That's pretty awesome. The same thing with, Reservoir Dogs, the ear scene.
Oh,
he cuts, they pan away when he's about to cut the guy's ear off. And all you hear is him screaming. And then later on, you see the guy with the ear saying, hello, hey.
Did they actually, I remember that, I'm not sure if I remember in the lore, did Quentin shoot the ear and then shot that other version just to see it, or he's had that idea, like, let's pan away, which obviously just makes the scene so much more, gruesome and terrifying. And, it's absolutely insanity. Oh
yeah. And, that's part of, with horror, what I call the million ILM theory of your audience's imagination has the power of a million ILMs that you could not pay. You do not have enough money in your budget to pay for the kind of effects that you would want. But by simply moving it away, panning away, or not showing it, but you just hear it, sound is half the picture. So if you can get a good Foley mix, then that's a lot easier to do and a lot cheaper to do than, say, coming up with a bunch of gore and makeup effects and things like that. You could probably show the after effects if you want, but you don't have to.
No, there is a story this movie we're going to talk about is a little bit of a side note here, but Taxi Driver, not arguably a horror movie, but definitely a disturbing one, and definitely a pretty bloody one as well. Talking about filmmakers. The lore is, and I actually heard this, Quentin Tarantino was telling this story, and he didn't even know if it was real yet, because I don't think he'd ever confirmed it with Marty or not. But the way the story goes is that in Taxi Driver, they went through the rating process in 1976, and it came back as X-rated. And then the studio executive said, you're going to have to cut this, or this out, or else this movie's not going to get released. And Marty, at that age, at that time, was so distraught that someone was going to, kill his masterwork, that he got a loaded gun, sat in his room and got drunk with the loaded gun. And a bunch of his friends came over, which were like De Palma, I think Steven, Coppola. They all came over because they heard what was going on, and they talked him out of not going to kill the executive.
Yeah.
But then the way he got around it, do you know how he got the R rating?
I think didn't he just resubmit it?
Nope. He did resubmit it, but he just took 1 point off the red in the blood.
Oh.
So the blood's a little bit more burgundy as opposed to a bright red. That's all he did. He didn't cut a frame.
Change the color grade. That's it.
And he did not cut a frame. And
that's yeah. I can believe that as something that would have happened. The funny thing, Texas Chainsaw Massacre got an X rating when it first came out, and it was like, well, it's so gory. And I'm like, if you go and watch it, nobody actually, except for one guy gets hung up on a meat hook, and Leatherface gets himself in the leg with the chainsaw. It's like a tiny cut, really. There's no real, there's no gore on screen, really. It's like got skeletons, you've got...
It's disturbing. It's a disturbing thing.
Yeah, right. It's all the implied horror of things, the implied terror of, like, there's this scary guy, he's wearing a human face as a mask, and he's got a chainsaw, and it's like, yep, okay.
Yeah, X rating.
Yeah.
Now, what advice do you have for screenwriters wanting to add twists and turns to their horror screenplay, which are arguably one of the best twists of all time is Sixth Sense. And if you haven't seen that movie, I'm sorry. We're going to now ruin it for you. It's not our fault. Since it came out in the 90s, not our fault. But yeah, that's one of the greatest twists of all time. Is there any, and then of course, M. Night, I think he's been fighting to get back to that ever since. And he kind of, I think he almost pigeonholed himself into like, okay, now every single script I do has to have an insane twist at the end of it, or else it's not an M. Night Shyamalan thing, because it was just so powerful. But I'm a huge fan of M. Night. I think he has his misses, but everybody has his misses.
Well, I would say if you want to include a twist, just try to make it something that's going to take it to a whole nother level. It's like, okay, you think you're watching this straight up slasher flick, and at the end you put a twist in where it's like, oh, well, this guy is actually killing people for a reason. They say every villain is telling their own story. They're the hero. They're the hero of their story.
Absolutely.
Like I try to use a classic one I use is Vader from Star Wars. It's like,
right.
Yeah, he's in his mind, he's actually a good guy because he's trying to stop the galaxy from collapsing into chaos. And well, yeah, it didn't quite work out for him, but Ricardo Montalban Khan in Star Trek 2, probably one of the greatest villains ever on screen that I've ever seen.
Oh, so good.
He feels like he's righteously justified in doing everything he did to Kirk because he stranded him on that planet. The planet was basically destroyed and turned into a desert. His wife died. All this other stuff. It's like, the minute I get out of here, I'm coming for you. So you don't have to just have a generic villain. That's one way to actually add a twist to it. My Bloody Valentine is a good example of that in the horror genre. You can even make the villain sympathetic in that way, where like I can kind of understand why he or she is doing this.
Well, Hannibal Lecter. Oh
yeah.
He almost becomes a hero. Not in Silence of the Lambs, kind of becomes okay. You could argue it, but he's definitely an anti-hero if he is a hero at all. But he's not the main villain. Buffalo Bill is in the first Silence of the Lambs. But the other movies that came afterwards, he's essentially the hero of those movies. Hannibal, and the brilliance of that character and of Anthony Hopkins' portrayal is in Silence of the Lambs. You're rooting for Hannibal. You want him to get out. You arguably want him to eat some people. And it's disturbing. It's disturbing as an audience member that you're rooting for a cannibalistic serial killer.
Right. Well, you got he prefers to eat free range rude. So it's like, oh, well, he's taking care of a problem we all have.
Right. He's not eating the little girl and the puppy.
Yeah, but he also has very, I guess you could say refined tastes because of
fava beans, obviously.
Yes, and also it's like, okay, well he ate the one flautist in the orchestra because he wasn't playing right. Because he wanted the orchestra to sound better.
But we laugh, but that's a great character, like a great thing for that character to be, because in his whacked out world, that makes sense. Oh, and the ending, when he's like, I'm going to have an old friend for dinner, one of the greatest ending lines of movie history, you want him to eat him. You want him. That guy was such a prick. It's just absolutely a brilliant portrayal. And that won the Oscar. I think it's one of the few horror movies that won the Oscar. I don't think or is it the first? I'm not even sure.
It swept pretty well.
All the five majors. Yeah.
Yeah, so and then actually I think that tied, but it was one of the first ones I think that actually got serious recognition by the Academy, and it's not like we go back to Poltergeist or something like that. It's like, oh, here's a fun summer horror film. It's like, no, this is real serious dark stuff, psychological horror. That the monster is a human, but he's super intelligent. Both Buffalo Bill and Hannibal Lecter, but you really, you want to cheer on him. You want Buffalo Bill to get caught. That's kind of a given. Even I don't know. I keep going back to Clerks 2 with when they were parodying the whole scene with Goodbye Horses with that. But yeah, I mean, even Buffalo Bill, he's a smart guy. So you're dealing with highly intelligent people who are also, well, in one case cannibalistic, the other one is just making a suit out of women, and they're
so terrifying. This is such a terrifying. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsor. And now back to the show.
Yeah.
But and for screenwriters listening, to make a villain, just a couple of decisions changes Hannibal from the guy we're rooting for to an absolutely despicable person, and in the hands of a worse screenwriter and a worse director and a worse performer, Hannibal could have been a throwaway character who had no depth, or we really didn't love it. What makes us love Silence of the Lambs is not only the plot, but it's Hannibal and his interactions with Clarice. But Buffalo Bill does nothing redeemable, where Hannibal, even when he's escaping and he's like, terrifying, eating those guys and stuff, they kick the dog in many ways. And that's the thing. It's like, if you want to make a villain, just have him kick a dog or slap a baby and he's an automatic villain, or she's an automatic villain. Well, that's what the screenwriter did with Hannibal, but Hannibal was the dog. So you wanted the dog to get revenge in many ways.
Yep. I did kind of go there with The Curse as well. We had this one character that was a little girl that was the daughter of the acting sheriff, and the monster gets her, and later on the acting sheriff, played by Louis Mandylor, he finds basically her hand, and that's it. That's all that's left of her at that point. I was like, yeah, I killed a kid. Okay. But it's like, I had to go there because I had to give him strong enough reason to, number one, I was trying to kill two birds with one stone with this. So I was
no pun intended.
Yeah. I was trying to make sure that he had a strong enough reason to go after this thing, to believe that it was real, but also to let the main character off the hook, because he kept thinking that the main character was the one doing all this killing. So I was like, well, I guess I'm just going to have to, well, first I killed the cat and then I killed her. So I didn't save the cat, I killed it.
Now, I'm going to ask you a few questions I ask all my guests. What are 3 screenplays every screenwriter should read?
Ooh, good one. I really think Aliens, the James Cameron script, is a good one to read, especially if you can get a copy that's got everything, especially stuff that was like you eventually cut out. That's a really good read. A little longer, but not bad. North by Northwest by Hitchcock. Yes, definitely want to read that one. And I do want to say, read Clockwork Orange. Read the script for Clockwork Orange, but at the same time, if you haven't read the novel that it's based on by Anthony Burgess, get that too, just so you can see how far Kubrick deviated.
He always does. He always did.
But as far as it being close to the material, it's like, okay, I can see where he drew this from. Especially if you're getting into adaptations, that's a good one to look at when you want to compare the two, because you have basically a record of here's what Anthony Burgess wrote and here's what Kubrick wrote, and that's what's on the screen, so you can actually follow that path. And
I watched Clockwork Orange the other day I hadn't seen it in years, and I just watched the first 15 minutes. How that was ever released is beyond me. How that got past censors, how that got a studio put money behind that. If that got released today, there would be an uproar that nobody would even understand. Yep. And he was doing it in the 70s. It's absolutely remarkable, really is.
Right. And I think part of why he was able to get away with that was after 2001, which was huge budget. He he really couldn't find, because of the box office numbers and everything. With that, he wasn't able to get the kind of budgets that he wanted similar. Mm-hmm. So he's like, well, what can I do that's I can just kind of run and gun it almost?
Yeah, it's an indie. It almost looks like an indie film. I know exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, and he didn't have exactly a really huge budget on it, but he was, because of that, he was, I think, got a lot more control, leniency, at least from the studio producing it, and then Warner Brothers was the distributor, and I think there was some problems. It did get initially an X rating. He did have to cut a few bits and pieces. That's one of the reasons why the William Tell overture scene is super fast, because he originally did shoot it just regular speed, but it's like, okay, if we speed it up, it's gonna be harder for people to make out stuff in there. So
because he was having like a menage a trois, it was pretty graphic.
Yeah, with 2 underage girls. So.
Oh, I didn't even realize it was. Oh, Jesus Christ, that's true.
Yeah,
we got away with stuff is beyond me.
Yeah, the book was a lot more graphic about that. It was not, let's just say, completely consensual. So, yeah. So that, again, that's another one of those things. Like, here's how you can skate around stuff. Nowadays, you can release a video on demand, digital. Plenty of platforms and
without ratings,
yeah, and that's kind of nice. If you wanted to, but if you ever want your film to go onto, like say you want to get it on HBO or something like that,
you gotta get it rated.
Or even Showtime. I mean, still looking at David Lynch's revival of Twin Peaks, and it's like, okay, that a big budget. But he actually finally got to do a lot of things he wanted to do with that show, and still further kind of explore the horror in that too, which was nice. And he even had his Kubrickian moment as well in one episode. I call it the Kubrickian moment, when they're flashing back to the creation of Bob with the nuclear test blast. And that whole sequence is like, yeah, this is like the Stargate almost. Stargate sequence of 2001.
Now, what advice would you give a screenwriter trying to break into the business today?
You don't have to go and hit studios up. Nowadays, camera technology, what it is, and everything else, you can be a Robert Rodriguez if you want. You can write it, you can polish it, you can actually put it up yourself if you want. There are a lot more alternative avenues now than like, oh, I got to go get an agent and I have to get representation and then I have to do all these writing assignments and things like that. You don't necessarily have to do that these days. There are filmmakers popping up all over the place, and especially like this past year, is with the lockdown happening and everything. One thing that I noticed was a lot of solo filmmakers were making essentially existential horror films and putting them up, short films, putting them up on YouTube, and they're actually pretty amazing, because it's like, well, I got nothing better to do. I got a camera, it's me, and I'm trapped in here. So let's
make something happen. Yeah, let's make something happen. Now, what is the lesson that took you the longest to learn, whether in the film industry or in life?
Basically, there's what you know, and then there's a whole lot of stuff that you don't know, and it's going to take you a long time to figure it out. So. If you're in your 20s, you don't think you know everything. I mean, you think you know everything, but you're probably not going to figure it all out until you hit maybe your mid 30s, and then even then, it's not everything.
No, God, no.
Yeah.
But that could be said every decade. You think you knew everything, but you don't. But I would agree with you. Yeah, it's going to take a minute. This is not going to happen overnight. You're going to learn a whole bunch along the way. And can you tell me about the work that you're doing with the Able Artist Foundation?
Yes. That is Stephen Letness is a film composer who he's blind. He has retinitis pigmentosa. And one day we actually we talked on the phone, and he said, hey, I'm thinking about trying to do this nonprofit that helps disabled musicians be able to get not only access to hardware and software and things like that for composing, but also to promote the work of disabled musicians. And he ended up, I and one other person, Stacy, we sat down and we actually came up with a design and we built the thing out. And we're actually just doing a refit now on the whole thing because now we're doing he's doing contests and grants and everything else. It's really expanding very fast now. But yeah, anybody that's a partner company on there gets they offer all of their services and stuff for basically 50% off. Like the minimum you can offer is 50%. So once you're a verified disabled person, which there's a verification process and it's actually not that hard to do. Once you do that, then you have access to all of these massive discounts on software and I think even hardware and even lessons.
Very cool.
Yeah, and it just keeps growing. I think we're still getting suggestions from people. It's like, hey, you ought to hit these people up. It's like, okay, well, and Steven's really grown out from that to the point where he's become almost a spokesperson now for disabled musicians and film composers and everything.
That's great, man. That's awesome. And where can people find your movies and your books?
Oh, they're available on Amazon.com. There's The Cursed, and there's also, that's the movie, my main feature. And then Horror Screenwriting, The Nature of Fear is available on Amazon. I do have some short films up on YouTube as well that I did. There was one I worked on that was supposed to be a pilot for a web series called Asphalt She-Wolves.
Nice. Great title.
Which is, that was actually my my writing partner on that, producing partner helped with that. And then Golden Opportunity, which is more of a sci-fi dystopian. It's kind of weird that when I look back on it now, we shot it a few years before Trump became president, and then I look at it and go like, this is what could have happened.
Very cool, man. Devin, man, thank you so much for being on the show, man. I enjoyed our going down the rabbit hole of horror and horror screenwriting and just geeking out a little bit with another film geek. So I appreciate you, man. Thank you so much.
No problem.
I want to thank Devin so much for coming on the show and dropping his terrifying knowledge bombs on the tribe today. Thank you so much, Devin. If you want to get links to anything we spoke about in this episode, head over to the show notes at bulletproofscreenwriting.tv/136. And if you haven't already, please subscribe and leave a good review for this show wherever you are listening to this episode. Thank you again for listening, guys. As always, keep on writing, no matter what. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Bulletproof Screenwriting Podcast at bulletproofscreenwriting.tv.